LIZZER company. The directors of LIZZER company, a listed company, have read various reports on excessive disclosures in the annual report. They have decided to take action and do not wish to disclose any further detail concerning the two matters relevant to the current year financial statements for the year ended 31st of January 2018. पहले पूछा क्या है? A question may discuss why it is important to ensure the optimal level of disclosure in the annual reports, describing the reasons why users of annual reports may have found disclosures to be excessive in recent years. तो ये इन दोनों में से रिलेटेड ही नहीं है। वो नहीं, ये है ना। Developing framework for disclosure is at the forefront of the current debate, and there are many bodies around the world attempting to establish an overarching framework to make financial statement disclosures more effective, coordinated, and less redundant. It has been argued that instead of focusing on raising the quality of disclosures, these efforts have placed their emphasis almost exclusively on reducing the quantity information. The belief is that excessive disclosure is burdensome and can overwhelm users. However, it can be argued that there is no such thing as too much useful information for users. According to the conceptual framework, the disclosures in the financial statements should comprise of the two fundamental principles, which is relevance and faithful representation. These both are usually used by conceptual framework in recognizing elements, but can be used in the disclosures as well. That is, the information that has been provided by to the users by the management or the by the entity should have relevance, that is should be material in nature, so that the investors or users direct their attention towards the information which is highly material in nature, that is more important to the management, rather than focusing their attention on immaterial information or elements of the business, as if they focus their information or focus their attention on the immaterial information, this might distract them from what is actually important for the entity to focus on, or for the investors to focus on. In recent years, it has been seen that uh, too much disclosure in the financial statements creates clutter, because of which it might become a problem that investors would feel that the disclosure notes are too monotonous in nature, and might not uh, you know read the disclosure, or might not pay their attention towards the matters at all. Thus, the disclosure note should be concise and entity specific, and uh, should be kept as low as possible. However, there can be certain investors who are not from the field from which the entity belongs, because of which they might need more disclosures in order to make their decision about whether or not to lend their resources to the company, and if yes, then at what return rate? Uh, this is also sometimes a problem, because if an entity keeps their material level too low, then too much information will be disclosed in the financial statements. And if the entity keeps their material level too high, then only very few information will be disclosed in the financial statements. So therefore, we can say that the information that has been presented should be based upon the management judgment, and as concise and as entity specific as possible. इन्वेस्टर्स का अपन ने बोल दिया, पोटेंशियल एंड ये सब सब्जेक्टिव होता है। The disclosure note should include what is relevant for the company and what is and how the management looks at the risks and opportunities in the future, rather than focusing on the past information, because the past information is already available in the financial statements. That is the last year's results ऐसा चेक कर लेते हैं एक बार. Optimal level. Excessive disclosures can obscure relevant information and make it harder for the users to find the key points about performance of the business and its prospects for long-term success. It is important that the financial statements are relevant, reliable, and can be understood in order that stakeholders can effectively assess the stewardship of management. Additionally, it is important for the efficient operation of the capital markets, and that annual reports do not contain unnecessary information. However, it is equally important that the useful information is presented in a coherent way so that users can find what they are looking for, again, an understanding of the company for and gain an understanding of the company's business and the opportunities, risk, and constraints that it faces. Barabar. A company, however, must treat all of its stakeholders equally in the provision of the information. It is for each stakeholder to decide whether they wish to make use of that information. It is not for a company to preempt the stakeholders' rights in this regard by withholding the information. A shareholder who has very few shares in the company may on require information about the company's profitability and ability to pay off dividend. However, professional analysts will want as much information as is possible about the company. मतलब जितना information रहेगा वो professional analyst के लिए उतना ही important है. वो ठीक है. A significant cause of excessive disclosure in annual reports is the vast array of requirements imposed by laws, regulations, and financial reporting standards. कि laws और regulations जो है उसके वजह से ज़्यादा excessive information दी जा सकती है. Regulators and standard setters have a key role to play in cutting clutter, but cutting the requirements that they themselves already impose, and by guarding against the imposition of unnecessary new disclosures. A listed company may have to comply with listing rules, company law, international financial reporting standards, and corporate governance codes. And if it has a overseas listing, any local requirements such as those of the SEC in the US. Therefore, a major source of excessive disclosure is the fact that different parties require differing disclosures for the same matter. For example, an international bank in the UK may have to disclose credit risk under IFRS 7, financial instruments disclosures in the Companies Act, and the disclosures and transparency rules, the SEC rules and industry guide 3. ये उन्होंने बस एक एग्जांपल दिया हुआ है पूरा. A problem is that different regulators have different audiences. Actually, ये भी बोल सकते हैं कि different companies will provide different disclosure information, because of which comparability cannot take place on a company to company basis as compared to the disclosure notes. Is that different regulators have different audiences in the mind for the different requirements they impose on annual reports. Regulators attempt to reach wider ranges of actual and potential users, and this can lead to loss of focus and structure in the reports. भाई ये इतना देखो लास्ट में तो इन्होंने सब मटेरियल की बात की कि लेंथ ऑफ द रिपोर्ट necessarily the problem, but the way in which it is organized, inclusion of immateriality disclosures will make this problem worse. तो वो immaterial का तो पॉइंट ठीक है, वो लास्ट वाला पैराग्राफ. ये 3 पैराग्राफ पढ़ लेते हैं अभी के लिए, वरना ये बहुत ज्यादा लिखा है इन्होंने फॉर 7 marks ओनली. Shareholders are increasingly unhappy with the substantially increase in the length of reports that has occurred in recent years. Many companies present annual reports in excess of 200 pages. ये तो बहुत ज़्यादा information दी जाती है. This often has resulted in a better information but more confusion. हाँ, this can create more confusion for the investors. ये अपन बोल सकते हैं. नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ पे जाता हूँ मैं सीधा. Published account will show last section of statement of letters नहीं वो ठीक है लास्ट नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ पे जाता हूँ. Preparers now have to consider many other stakeholders including employees. हाँ ये वाला पॉइंट बहुत सही है. Preparers now have to consider many other stakeholders including employees, unions, environmentalists, suppliers, etc. The disclosure requirements to meet the needs of the wider audience have contributed to the increased volume of disclosure. The growth of previous initiatives, ongoing concerns, sustainability risk, the business model, and others that have been identified by regulators as key has been expanded to the annual report size. The problem that seems to exist is that disclosure is being made because of disclosure checklists suggest it may need to be made without assessing whether the disclosure is necessary in a company's particular circumstance. वो ठीक है checklist is inherent in these checklists that they include all possible disclosures that could be material. हाँ that is okay. मतलब यहाँ पे बेसिकली मटेरियल इन्फॉर्मेशन देनी है. ये पैराग्राफ पूरा का पूरा इमटेरियलिटी के ऊपर ही है कि इमटेरियल अगर अपन डिस्क्लोज करेंगे तो इट विल मेक द प्रॉब्लम इवन वर्स. Often able to bypass much information and they consider unimportant, especially if the report is online. तो ऐसा इन्होंने यहाँ पे सब बोला हुआ है. लेकिन एक पॉइंट अच्छा है कि अ फर्दर प्रॉब्लम इज दैट अकाउंटिंग पॉलिसी डिस्क्लोजर इज ऑफन बॉयलर प्लेट प्रोवाइडिंग लिटिल specific detail of how companies apply their general policies to particular transactions. Many disclosure requirements have been introduced in new or revised international financial reporting standards over the last 10 years without review. नहीं that's okay. मैं यहाँ पे बॉयलर प्लेट अप्रोच करते बस वो एक बार चेक कर लेता हूँ. Boiler plate approach is a method of using standard reusable piece of content in various contexts. ओके या राइट क्योंकि जब हम भी डिस्क्लोजर्स देते हैं टू आवर क्लाइंट्स तो हम लोग कैसा करते हैं कि हम लोग स्टैंडर्ड सेम रखते हैं लाइक वी व्हाट वी डू इज वी कॉपी पेस्ट द डिस्क्लोजर्स फ्रॉम द लास्ट ईयर इटसेल्फ एंड देन जस्ट एडिट इट आउट. मतलब ये लोग क्या बोले कि मेथड ऑफ यूजिंग स्टैंडर्ड यूजेबल पीस ऑफ कंटेंट इन वेरियस कॉन्टेक्स्ट. तो ये लोग बाकी सब चीजों को सेम रखते हैं एंड देन जस्ट एडिट इट आउट. पर्पस ऑफ बॉयलर प्लेट इज टू प्रोवाइड कंसिस्टेंसी बेसिकली. जैसे अगर हमने पहले पैराग्राफ में लेट्स से इंफॉर्मेशन दी हुई है फाइनेंशियल इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स के ऊपर बाद में दी हुई है लाइक फाइनेंशियल इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स उसमें हमने पहला पहला दिया हुआ है इक्विटी के ऊपर फिर नेक्स्ट दिया हुआ है डेट के ऊपर नेक्स्ट दिया हुआ है कंपाउंड इंस्ट्रूमेंट के ऊपर. तो हम इसी फॉर्मेट में नेक्स्ट ईयर भी देते हैं और बस अंदर चेंजेस करते हैं. सो इन सर्टेन सिनेरियोस हम ये भी बोल सकते हैं कि द कंपनी यूजेस बॉयलर प्लेट अप्रोच प्रोवाइडिंग लिटिल स्पेसिफिक डिटेल ऑफ हाउ कंपनीज अप्लाई देयर जनरल पॉलिसीज टू पर्टिकुलर ट्रांजैक्शंस. ऐसा इन्होंने यहाँ पे बोला हुआ है. Efficiency in writing communication. It can also help establish a company's voice. हाँ, it can also help establish a company's voice and tone and can be used to create talking points for leadership. It's basically the style in which the company presents its financial statements का disclosures. Describe the barriers to reducing excessive disclosures and in annual reports and comment on the IASB's response to the disclosure problem. Describe barriers to reduce excessive disclosures. The barriers to reduce excessive disclosure क्या हो सकते हैं? एक तो materiality तो is the first and main barrier. You not provide immaterial information, provide only material information. ये एक है. Uh, जो कमेंट करना है ना आईएसबी के रिस्पॉन्सिबल द डिस्क्लोजर प्रॉब्लम इज रियल एंड इट मे कंफ्यूज द इन्वेस्टर एज टू वेदर और नॉट टू लेंड देयर मनी टू द कंपनी और नो as the investor might get confused with and the monotonousness of the disclosures or the length of the disclosures might be a bad indication that the company has to provide so much disclosures for their financial statements. ऐसा लाइक कंपनी को इतना ज्यादा क्यों देना पड़ रहा है ये डिस्क्लोजर्स ऐसा. कमेंट तो इजीली हो जाएगा। बैरियर्स का ये ऊपर ज्यादा है, एक तो मटेरियलिटी, दूसरा if there's a significant change in the presentation of a particular element, कि पहले हम लोग उसको रिवैल्यूएशन मॉडल पे मेजर करते थे, अभी हम लोग उसको एक कॉस्ट मॉडल पे मेजर कर रहे हैं, या कुछ भी ऐसा। फॉर एग्जांपल, हम पहले उस कॉस्ट को कैपिटलाइज करते थे, अभी हम उन चीज़ों को लाइक एक्सपेंस आउट कर रहे हैं, ऐसा। इंडस्ट्री एवरेज भी देख सकते हैं, या और बैरियर्स आई डोंट थिंक सो यार, ये दो तो मेरे को लगता है बेसिक होंगे। वाओ, फॉर 5 marks they have written this shit, I cannot believe it। इतना नहीं लिखना, 5 mark के लिए इतना नहीं लिखना है, बट विल जस्ट रीड। देयर आर बिहेवियरल बैरियर्स टू रिड्यूसिंग डिस्क्लोजर्स। इट मे बी दैट द थ्रेट ऑफ क्रिटिसिज्म और litigation could be considerable limitation on the ability to cut down on disclosures. The threat for of future litigation may outweigh any benefits to obtain from the eliminating catch-all disclosures। ये भी एक बहुत अच्छा पॉइंट है कि कॉस्ट बेनिफिट एनालिसिस देख के चलना चाहिए, कि cost of providing additional disclosures should not exceed the benefits. The threat to future litigation may outweigh the benefits to be obtained from eliminating catch-all disclosures. Preparers of annual reports are likely to err on the side of caution and include more detailed disclosures that are strictly necessary to avoid challenge from auditors and regulators. Removing disclosures is perceived as creating a risk of adverse comment and regulatory challenge. Disclosure is the safest option and is therefore often the default position. Preparers and auditors may be reluctant to change the current position unless the risk of regulatory challenge is reduced। ठीक है। Companies have a tendency to repeat disclosures because they were there last year. Preparers wish to present balanced and sufficiently informative disclosures and may be unwilling to change. It is common practice for companies to use disclosure requirements in IFRS accounting standards as if they were items on the checklist। तो कंपनीज यूजुअली ये डिस्क्लोजर्स को ऐसे ट्रीट करती है कि दे आर जस्ट आइटम्स ऑन द चेकलिस्ट, और वो टिक मार्क करते जाते हैं। ये पॉइंट काफी बार आया है। rather than using judgment to decide what information to provide in the financial statements, तो हमको ब्लाइंडली बस उस चेकलिस्ट की तरह टिक नहीं करते जाने कि ये दे दिया, ये दे दिया, ये दे दिया। वेदर इट इज एक्चुअली रिक्वायर्ड और नॉट, वो हमें चेक करना है। This in turn encourages auditors to take a tick box compliance approach to avoid challenge and adverse publicity। IFRS 2 Practice Statement 2, making materiality judgment aims to assist preparers of general purpose financial statement which the disclosure with a disclosure problem, then describes a four-step process to making materiality judgment। मटेरियलिटी होता क्या, हम वो भी बता देंगे। पहली बात तो उससे आंसर और बड़ा बन जाएगा कि ओमिटिंग, मिसलीडिंग और ऑब्सकरिंग इंफॉर्मेशन, वो सब बता देंगे। बाय। मैं खाली स्टेप्स बताए हुए हैं। Practice statement was issued as a part of the ISB's disclosure initiative, the broad-based initiative to explore how disclosures can be improved and make challenges to IFRS standards. To achieve this, amendments have already been made to IAS 1 presentation of financial statements and IAS 7 cash flow statements, including an update to the definition of materiality, which has been reflected in practice statement 2। अच्छा, okay। Mm, the concept of materiality is widely defined and understood, and the amendment is intended to result in a reduction in the immaterial accounting policies। ठीक है, बाकी सब तो ओवर इंफॉर्मेशन दी गई है। B is working on a targeted standards levels review of disclosure requirements aiming improving the usefulness of the disclosure stakeholders. ISB work कर रहा है फिलहाल कुछ स्टैंडर्ड लेवल रिव्यू पे कि ये इंफॉर्मेशन ये इम्प्रूव करनी चाहिए यूजफुलनेस. For the disclosure initiative project is underway to develop reduce disclosure. इन्होंने comment तो किया ही नहीं है actually. They have not even commented about the fact कि ISB's response to disclosure problem. अच्छा, इज दिस कि आईएसबी अभी क्या कर रहा है उनको सॉल्व करने के लिए? इज दैट द थिंग वर्किंग? अच्छा, तो आईएसबी अभी काम चालू कर रहा है इस चीज के ऊपर. दिस इज द कमेंट दैट दे हैव मेड. डेवलपिंग गाइडेंस टू बोर्ड फॉर टू यूज व्हेन ड्राफ्टिंग disclosure objectives and requirement in the future and testing this guidance by applying to its existing requirements of IAS 19 employee benefits and IFRS 13 fair value measurement. Amendments and disclosure requirements of these two standards. The objective is not to change the volume of required disclosure, although this may be consequence. ठीक है, दिस इज जस्ट बेसिक उन्होंने थ्योरी बताया हुआ है एक्चुअली. दिस इज जस्ट वेरी बोरिंग. आगे बढ़ते हैं यार. Advise the directors on their views that no further information should be disclosed in the financial statements in respect of the debt issue and the loan covenants. LIZZER company is a debt issuer whose business is the securitization of a portfolio of underlying investment and financing their purchase through the issue of listed limited resource debt, recourse debt. Recourse debt, okay. The payment of the debt depends on the performance of the underlying investments. Debt holders bear the ultimate risks and rewards of ownership of the underlying investment. Given the debt specific nature of the underlying investment, the risk profile of individual debt may differ. LIZZER company does not consider its debt holders to be as being amongst the primary users. LIZZER company does not consider its debt holders as being amongst the primary users of the financial statements and accordingly does not wish to provide disclosure and debt holders exposure to the risks in the financial statements as distinct from the risks faced by the company's shareholders in accordance with IFRS 7 financial instruments disclosures. An invalid statement altogether. देखो, लेजर कंपनी इज अ डेट इशूअर whose business is securitizing a portfolio of underlying investment and financing their purchase through a listed ठीक है recourse of debt. The repayment of the debt depends upon the performance of the underlying investment. ठीक है. See, the debt holders, the statement of Lizzer company that it does not consider debt holders to be amongst the primary users of financial statements and thus they are not providing or wishing to give a disclosures is incorrect as there might not be debt holders who would want the information from the financial statements, but there could be certain people who would be requiring debt from a company because of which or from Lizzer who would be requiring debt from Lizzer and thus would want to know about the in the company's स्टाइल नहीं माना जाता मैं द कंपनीज business operations as regards to the debts which they issue to the other people or to the market as a whole, ये अपन बोल सकते हैं. एंड दस उनको शायद डिस्क्लोजर की जरूरत पड़ सकती है. देन देयर कैन बी सर्टेन पोटेंशियल इन्वेस्टर्स हु वुड वांट टू नो व्हाट at what rate or at what level or capacity the leaser company is providing debt to its to the market so as to understand whether or not to invest their money in leaser company as a too riskier investment would not be suitable for the shareholders, and thus they would want to invest their money elsewhere. As debt holders, तो ये अपन कॉइन कॉपी कर देंगे. As debt holders bear the ultimate risks of the underlying investments not getting paid off. However, if they are paid off, then they are paid at higher interest rates, and because of which leaser company may earn significant rewards from their underlying investment. Thus, it is important for the investors to understand at what rate of return does leaser company provide debt, and how does the company collect their debt. ये सब अपन बता सकते हैं. What is the procedure for collecting the debt? What is the time lapse in which they give the debt? Does it consider the concept of inflation? ये सब अपन और पॉइंट्स इसमें ऐड अप कर सकते हैं. चेक कर लेते हैं. डेट इशूअर, इसका आंसर इन्होंने छोटा सा लिखा हुआ है, जबकि ये 5 मार्क के लिए इतना बड़ा है, और 7 मार्क के लिए ना, ये 6 मार्क के लिए इतना छोटा आंसर इन्होंने लिखा हुआ है. Leaser's perception of who could reasonably be considered to be amongst the users of financial statement is too narrow, as it is limited to company shareholders rather than the debt holders. Exactly. rather than including debt holders, ये कंपनी के शेयर होल्डर्स यूज कर सकते हैं rather than debt holders, जो हमने ही बोला. The risk disclosures required by IFRS 7 should be enhanced to include those relating to the debt holders by individual series of debt where practicable, to ensure that significant differences between various series of debt are not obscured. According to the concept of according to the conceptual framework for financial reporting, the objective of general purpose financial reporting is to provide financial information that is useful to existing, that is useful to the existing एंड पोटेंशियल इन्वेस्टर्स, लेंडर्स एंड क्रेडिटर्स इन मेकिंग डिसीजंस. तो ये भी अपन ने कवर किया था कि वेदर द कंपनीज और द इन्वेस्टर्स वुड वांट टू इन्वेस्ट देयर मनी इन द कंपनी और नॉट. सो वी सेड दैट द कंसेप्चुअल फ्रेमवर्क आल्सो से दैट इंफॉर्मेशन इज मटेरियल इफ ओमिटिंग. इन्होंने मटेरियल का डेफिनेशन यहाँ पर दे दिया. ठीक है, हम ऊपर से कॉपी पेस्ट कर सकते थे, लेकिन आई डोंट थिंक मुझे वो क्लिक हुआ था कि मटेरियलिटी के बारे में कुछ भी लिखना है यहाँ पे. तो ये बोल सकते हैं कि शायद इसको ऐसे रख सकते हैं कि द द मटेरियल इंफॉर्मेशन रिगार्डिंग द डेट्स दैट आर बीन गिवन should be disclosed in the financial statements, your reports, ऐसा disclosure notes. The objective of IFRS 7 is to require entities to provide disclosures in their financial statements and enable users to evaluate the significance of the financial instruments for the entity's financial position and performance. दी के ये वाला पॉइंट भी कहीं ना कहीं कवर हो ही गया था, लेकिन IFRS 7 के थ्रू नहीं हुआ था. IFRS 7 states that amongst the other matters, for each type of risk arising from financial instruments, then entity shall disclose exposure to risk and how they arise. Actually अपन यहाँ पे देखते हैं एक्सपोजर टू टू डिफॉल्ट्स अराइजिंग, कि कितने लोग पैसा नहीं देंगे वापस, ऐसा भी बोल सकते हैं. द ऑब्जेक्टिव्स, पॉलिसीज एंड प्रोसेसेस फॉर मैनेजिंग द रिस्क एंड द मेथड्स यूज्ड टू मेजर द रिस्क. ठीक है. And the risk attached to the debt should therefore be disclosed. अपन ने क्या क्या बोला था? अपन ने बोला था what is the time lapse in which the money can be retained, and what is the process of collecting the debt, and what is the rate at which the debt is given. ये अपन ने पॉइंट्स कवर किए थे. ठीक है, they have only said risks, which is also fine, I feel. लास्ट वन, डेट के बाद लोन कोवेनेंट्स. At the date of financial statements 31st of January 18, ये हमारा ईयर एंड है. हाँ, ये हमारा ईयर एंड है. Lizzer company's liquidity position was quite poor, such that the debtors described it as unsatisfactory in the management report. During the first quarter of 18, the situation worsened, with the result that Lizzer company was in breach of certain loan covenants. At 31st of March 18, the financial statements were authorized for issue at the year end of April 18, the directors and audit reports both emphasized on the considerable risk of not being able to continue as a going concern. The notes to the financial statements indicated that there was an ample compliance with all loan covenants as at the date of financial statements. No additional information about the loan covenant was included in the financial statements. LIZZER company has been close to breaching the loan covenants in respect of free cash flows and equity ratio requirements at 31st of January 18. The auditor reserve felt that giving the existing information in the financial statements any further disclosure would be excessive and confusing to investors. नहीं भाई ये तो बहुत ही गलत statement है. According to IS1 presentation of financial statements, yeah, if the company is not able to continue as a going concern, then it would be reflected in its then the company would have to prepare its financial statements as on a breakup basis. ये अपन एक लाइन बात बताएंगे. पहले अपन बताएंगे IS1 के हिसाब से हर कंपनी को अपना एक assumption देना होता है, गोइंग कंसर्न assumption देना होता है at the end of each reporting period, that it will be able to comply and it will be able to trade for the next 12 months or be in business for the next 12 months ऐसा. However, in the current scenario, we can see that because of this unsatisfactory management report, the the situation had worsened and the liquidity problems had gone even further, because of which Leaser company was in breach of the certain loan covenants. Because of the breach of loan covenants, the loans would have now become payable, and as the loan would have become payable at 31st of uh, March 18, the liquidity position would have even worsened, because of which there will be certain serious implications on the company acting as a going concern. उसके बाद authorized for issue the directors and the auditors both. इन्होंने ये वाला लाइन तो ठीक है. The disclosures given by the company in the notes to financial statements, which indicate ample compliance with loan covenants at the date of financial statements, is quite questionable, because we can clearly see that the directors and auditors had already given or had emphasized on the considerable risk of it not being able to add as a going concern. If the company is not able to add as a going concern only, then the question of it having ample compliance with the loan covenants does not stand, and it is completely a false information. This might be misleading to the investors, and this might be given in order to get investments from the potential investors, thus you know hiding their बैड परफॉर्मेंस और लिक्विडिटी पोजीशन, ये हम बोल सकते हैं. हम्म, ठीक है. अभी के लिए इतना मैं बोल देता हूँ 7 मार्क के लिए. Leaser company should have disclosed additional information about the covenants relating to each loan or group of loans, including the amount of head room as deemed appropriate under IFRS 7. Subsequent breach of covenants represent a material event. Okay, material event after the reporting, क्योंकि 31st of March को पता चला ना उसके बारे में, जो कि 2-3 महीने बाद था आफ्टर द रिपोर्टिंग डेट. तो इसके वजह से and should have given rise to relevant disclosures required by IS 10 events after the reporting period in relation to material non-adjusting events after the reporting period. According to IFRS 7, an entity should disclose information that enables the users of its financial statements to evaluate the nature and the extent of the risk arising from the instruments to which the entity is exposed at the end of the reporting period. Disclosure of information about covenants is necessary to a great extent in the situations where the entity is close to breaching its covenants. A certain uncertainty is expressed in relation to the going concern assumption. Given the fact that at 31st of December 18, there was a considerable risk of breach of covenants in the near future, Leaser should have given additional information relating to the conditions attached to its loans, including details on how close the entity was to breaching the covenants. A breach of covenants after the date of financial statements, but before the financial statements are authorized for issue, constitutes a material non-adjusting event after the end of the reporting period, which requires further disclosure in accordance with IAS 10. Additionally, there appears to be an apparent inconsistency between the information provided in the directors and auditors' reports and that which is included in the financial statements. If balances are affected in the statement of financial position, there would need to be some adjustment. IFRS 2 practice statement 2, making materiality judgments include specific guidance or information relating to covenants. Leaser should have considered both consequences of breach and its likelihood. तो अपने को ये समझ में आया कि जो ब्रीच ऑफ कोवेनेंट्स है दैट इज अ नॉन एडजस्टिंग इवेंट, लेकिन मटेरियल नॉन एडजस्टिंग इवेंट, इसलिए उसका डिस्क्लोजर देना मतलब जरूरी है. The disclosure IS 10. Additionally, there appears to be an apparent inconsistency between information provided to the directors and auditors and that is included in the financial. मतलब बेसिकली हाँ हमने फॉल्सिफाई किया हुआ है उस स्टेटमेंट फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स में rather than जो इन्फॉर्मेशन डायरेक्टर्स और ऑडिटर्स ने हमको दी है वो उसमें.